Can the Falcons go worst to first and win the NFC South playing old school smash mouth football? Find out in this edition of the Atlanta Falcons 2023 Season Outlook.
ATL Jacob.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Cut to the Chase Sports Podcast. Tonight, we're going to continue our series and go down to the NFC South and take a look at the Falcons. They finished 7-10 last season, last place in the NFC South. They were only a game out from winning their division. Crazy to think about it. They started off their season 0-2, and then it went to 2-2. They were really back and forth until about the midway point of the season. They were 4-4 going into November, and they were first place. They had a couple of very tough losses in November that really put them behind the curve, and they just kept losing until it got to January, and they won their final two games to get them to 7-10. They made the switch. Desmond Ridder became the quarterback. 2-2. It was a very interesting experiment. We're going to keep going into. He was a second-round draft pick last year, so they're going to obviously keep that going. This is going to be very interesting to see how things go with Desmond Ridder full-time under center this season. And we're going to look at some adds and losses to see how that's going to look around him. They lose Olamide Zaccheaus on offense at receiver, and they lose Rashaan Evans at linebacker on defense. But the amount of adds the Falcons made was simply incredible. Calais Campbell comes from Baltimore. David Onyemata comes from the New Orleans Saints, as well as Caden Ellis, who had a very, very good season, 78 tackles, 7 sacks as a linebacker. Bud Dupree comes from Tennessee, who came off of injury. Jesse Bates III comes from my beloved Cincinnati Bengals, as he strengthens that secondary, as well as former third overall pick in the 2020 draft, Jeff Okudah, comes from Detroit after having a great season there. And then on offense, giving Desmond Ridder some help, Mac Hollins from the Raiders. If you haven't watched a whole lot of Falcons games and you've seen the box scores, it's pretty evident what Arthur Smith and offensive coordinator David Ragone want to do. Run the football. They drafted Bijan Robinson out of Texas, 8th overall, who people have regarded as him being a generational prospect at the running back position. Obviously, it's been declining over the last couple of seasons, the position as a whole, but Bijan Robinson might be the person to really keep it at a stellar rate. Tyler Algier was the rookie last year, 210 carries, 1,035 yards, and 3 touchdowns. And then Cordell Patterson, who made the switch from receiver to running back, has been in the backfield for the Falcons the last couple of years at 144 carries, 695 yards, 8 touchdowns. It was a bit of a shock that the Falcons went on ahead and drafted a running back in Bijan Robinson, but they went best player available. They're going to run the football any which way possible. They have a 3-headed monster that they can just power run it. They can run off tackle. They can pitch. They can do so many different things schematically with their offensive line up front, led by Jake Matthews, and then the right side of it, Chris Lindstrom and Caleb McGarry. This is going to be very fun to watch if you are an old school football historian. In the final 4 games of the 2022 season, the Falcons were 2-2, and they had a plus 3-point differential. They lost to the Saints by 3, lost to the Ravens by 8, beat the Falcons by 1, and beat the Bucs by 13. Desmond Ridder, 2-2, 63% completion percentage, 708 yards, 2 touchdowns, no picks. Didn't play bad. The kid's going to get a shot to be the full-time starter, and he's going to be throwing the ball to Drake London, Mac Hollins, Scotty Miller, and Kyle Pitts. Drake London, 8th overall pick the year before, 72 receptions, 866 yards, 4 touchdowns. For him having to be the number 1 receiver this past season, I thought he did a very good job taking on that role and taking on that big plate. Mac Hollins, coming from the Vegas Raiders, 57 catches, 690 yards, and 4 touchdowns. He's been around the league a little bit. He's got the idea of what a 2 should be doing. Maybe the Falcons will be able to have some better passing opportunities if their run game is going that well, and they can have more receivers getting wide open on play action schemes, zone schemes, and RPOs. So we'll see how that entire thing goes. And then Scotty Miller didn't really get a chance last season. There were a lot of receivers in Tampa Bay. Russell Gage played a very, very large portion of the time. and Miller was really pushed down the depth chart. So now he gets a second chance, this time against, in the rivalry of the Atlanta Falcons. It's going to be interesting to see how they're able to dial up some things for this young quarterback in Desmond Ridder and see if this kid is the truth. I'm going to tell you guys one thing. Do not sleep on this Atlanta Falcons defense in 2023. Calais Campbell is aging, but he had 5.5 sacks with a very good Baltimore defense. David Onyemata from the New Orleans Saints, 5 sacks at the nose tackle position. Grady Jarrett, who doesn't really get the respect that he deserves, had a down year with 6 sacks at the defensive end position, but hopefully things will be able to flourish for him. Lorenzo Carter, Troy Anderson, Bud Dupree, Caden Ellis, of course, 7 sacks at an inside linebacker position. That's great stuff to see. This unit, if they can get tight up front in the front 7, it's really going to help that back end out a lot. Because the back end, with A.J. Terrell, who was a superstar, he was hurt last season, he had a bit of an off year, will hopefully have the tools to bounce back. Richie Grant at strong safety had a great season, 121 tackles, 2 interceptions, 7 passes defended. They get the blockbuster Jesse Bates III, 4 interceptions, 8 pass defense, and then you got cornerback Jeff Okudah, who they traded a 5th-round pick for to Detroit. 73 tackles, an interception, 7 passes defended, shut down Justin Jefferson once last season. I mean, when you look at the room that's able to grow for this defense, it could happen. It really could. If the front 7 and the secondary, obviously, that's just how it goes in all teams in the National Football League. But I think this front 7, if they really can come together and glue this thing shut, this is going to be a tough defense, and it's really going to come out of nowhere, like a jack in the box. But you heard it here first. Watch out for the Falcons defense this season. The Falcons are actually one of 4 teams in the National Football League to not be scheduled a primetime game during this year's schedule release. A big game to look out for, Week 4 against the Jacksonville Jaguars, October 1st on ESPN+, 9:30 a.m. Eastern Time. The Jacksonville Jaguars were the division champions last year of the AFC South. They won a playoff game, had one of the largest comebacks in NFL history. And to see if the Atlanta Falcons can take tests with an up-and-coming team like the Jacksonville Jaguars early on in the season could really show who they are going forward. Now, their first game of the season against the Carolina Panthers, they'll see Bryce Young for years to come. First overall pick, the Panthers were second place in the division last year. I know the second through fourth place teams all had the same record, but it's going to be a battle. It's a home opener for the Falcons. They can really give Bryce Young a lot of hell. Go on ahead and help maybe get themselves a Week 1 win, and then they're back home against the Packers on Week 2. So a classic NFC South showdown to start the season off would be really nice for the Falcons to get a win opening the 2023 campaign. Now looking at their season, I believe they finished 7-10 last season, but looking at it, I think they're going to finish around the same record, 7-10, 8-9. I think they could have a 1-game improvement. It's going to be interesting to see. A lot of stuff's going to be riding on Desmond Ridder and seeing if he can make some of the necessary steps that a second-year quarterback should be making, especially for him being a first-year starter. They know the run game's going to be well. The receivers are a question mark. The defense should be better than it was last year. So right around that same record to maybe one more game, the 8-9 would be a big improvement for the Atlanta Falcons going forward.